Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the second section of the first chapter of Peter Berger's The Heretical Imperative, which I've entitled From Fate to Choice. So Berger's book came out in 1979 and has had a major impact on thought about contemporary possibilities of religious affirmation, to cite the subtitle. So the multiplication of options is intrinsic to modernity, so that modern consciousness entails a movement from fate to choice. This is very basic for Berger. Pre-modern people lived largely in a world of fate. They obviously lacked the choices provided by modern technology. Household tools, for example, might consist of a single implement handed down from father to son, and they didn't change in design across the generations. Clothing styles were fixed by the available materials, and even if they did have the possibility of change, they may have chosen to live according to tradition. For example, always using a particular tool, wearing a particular style of clothing, and so on. A traditional society was one in which the greater part of human activity was governed by clear-cut societal prescriptions. There was no problem of ambivalence. As modernity impinged or impinges on a traditional society, their world of fate is shaken, however, often quickly and dramatically. This can be seen in today's third world, I suppose what today we refer to as the global south. For example, with birth control. In traditional societies, sexuality and pregnancy were linked. Pregnancy could only be certainly avoided by not having sex, otherwise it was a matter of chance. But modern contraception provides an effective means of avoiding pregnancy, so that what was previously a matter of fate has become a choice. The difficulty in grasping this Promethean shift probably explains the difficulties which birth control campaigns often have. Birth control is not just a new technology, but a rebellion against traditional ideas of destiny. Institutions in traditional societies were largely taken for granted. People might not accept them with total certainty, otherwise there would never be any change. But generally things were done in the way that they had always been done, and alternative ways of doing things were generally rejected. How and who one married, how children were raised, how people made their living, exercised power, went to war, and so on, all were fixed. This also meant that there was a fixed repertoire of identities. There was a set way of doing things and a set of social roles by which they were done, and the connection between the two was much closer than in a modern society. So both society and self were experienced as fate. In human experience, an objective fact is one about which the individual feels that there is no choice. The experience of objectivity is pre-theoretical. That is, it precedes any systematic reflection upon it. What is experienced as necessary in life is also interpreted as necessary. In traditional societies, these interpretations are mostly rooted in mythology. The world is as it is because the gods decreed it so. More sophisticated speculations may be built on this view, as with the unfolding of the ancient Greek notions of fate, but in all cases the interpretations themselves ground the objective reality of social experience. They provide the ultimate legitimation for the experienced necessities. The process whereby modernity disrupts these worlds of fate is as follows. Modernity entails the proliferation of institutional choices, which enormously complicates the institutional network of a society. Fundamentally, this occurs because of the complications of the division of labor, but it's far broader. Modernity itself pluralizes. Where there used to be 2 institutions, there are now 50. Each is a program of human activity. Some present new choices, others don't. You have to deal with more government departments, for example. In Those areas in modern society where there is choice include sexual relations, very strictly defined in traditional societies, and associated with severe sanctions for any deviance. But in the modern West, there's been a progressive expansion in the range of accepted alternatives, who one can marry, what are marriage roles, premarital and extramarital relationships. Recent feminist and gay movements are an intensification of this. Thus, marriage across racial, ethnic, religious, class lines it has now become more common. Working wives, open and gay relationships, and so on. The sociologically revealing term sexual lifestyles has appeared as an expression of individual choice. For traditionalists, this may be incomprehensible or puzzling and may lead to revulsion and disapproval. There's also the possibility of sex change surgery as an even more radical individual choice. Fate becomes choice, destiny becomes decision. The multiplication of choices is experienced pre-theoretically by ordinary people with little or no interest in systematic reflection. Inevitably, it calls for interpretation and systematic questioning of what used to be taken as fate. Institutional pluralization affects human consciousness as well as action. Modern people face multiple options about how they think about the world, as well as what they do. They can choose their worldview as much as any other aspect of their private existence. There is now a smooth continuity between consumer choices in different areas of life, whether it be the brand of motor car one wants, sexual lifestyle, or religious preference. Modernity pluralizes both institutions and plausibility structures. Plausibility structures, a key term here. Apart from a few areas of direct personal experience, humans require social confirmation for their beliefs about reality. You probably don't need anyone to tell you to know that you have a toothache. Physical pain has its own plausibility without any social mediation. But morality requires a plausibility structure. For example, in a military institution, the values of honor, courage, and loyalty, as long as an individual is within the institutional context, its values will likely be taken for granted. But if he is transported into a different context, that plausibility is lost, and he may question his former values. For example, the soldier who becomes a civilian. The establishment, maintenance, loss, and replacement of these plausibility structures all involve social processes and support. Thus, the cohesion of institutions and the subjective cohesiveness of beliefs, values, and worldviews are directly related. If an individual's significant ties are with soldiers, their views of the world is massively plausible, but in a different social situation it isn't. The relationship between social context is not absolute. There are always deviants who maintain a view of the world and of themselves, even in the absence of social support, but that doesn't invalidate the generalization. Thus, the institutional pluralization of modernity carries with it a fragmentation and thus a weakening of every conceivable belief and value dependent upon social support. There are highly reliable plausibility structures in traditional societies, but in modernity there is instability, incoherence, and plausibility structures have become unreliable. Remember, all this is rooted in the pre-theoretical experience of ordinary everyday social life. Both the man in the street and the theorizing intellectual face the same experience of uncertainty. Thus, modernity is characterized by a competition between worldviews and a resultant crisis of belief. The modern man lives in a world of choice, not of fate, regarding beliefs, values, and worldviews. And to make decisions is to reflect. He, or she, I would say, must pause, whilst pre-moderns can simply act with unreflective spontaneity. Modern men have got to think more because their social situation forces them to do so, not because they're more intelligent or have a higher level of consciousness. Ordinary everyday life forces choice between competing options and thus reflection. Which toothpaste to choose, which lifestyle, which education, which occupation, which marriage partner, which style of marriage, and which form of child rearing to choose, which voluntary associations and social and political commitments to make, and so on. Some of these alternatives are of vast scope to an unprecedented extent. Modern man plans his own life and the future of his family and collectivity. There's also a new degree of complexity in the individual's experience of himself. Our subjectivity has become enormously accentuated by modernity. Modernization and subjectivization are cognate processes. In Western philosophy, there has been a turning to subjectivity since Descartes, and epistemology asks now, what can I know? But it's also a concern for ordinary people. We all need some sort of meaningful order to live in and live by. Even without modernity, children will ask, and parents will reply in terms of the assumptions of their culture, because those are the ones that have the greatest plausibility. But under modernity, the traditional answers are no longer enough. Without objective answers from our society, we are forced to turn inwards to seek whatever certainties we can find in our own subjectivity. Thus, Western culture is marked by an ever-increasing attention to subjectivity. Philosophy is only a tiny part of this. It's found also in modern literature, especially the novel, also modern art, and especially the great proliferation of psychologies and psychotherapies. These are all at the theoretical level, but they're rooted in pre-theoretical experience. That is, the experience that the socially defined universe can no longer be relied on. All these instances of modern thought are connected to the transition from fate to choice. Fate does not require reflection, but choice does. The more choices, the more reflection. Forced to turn inwards for answers, the outside world becomes more questionable. The inner world becomes more complex. These happen together and are unmistakable features of modern man. Thank you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their support. And if you are wanting to, you're very welcome to support my channel. Like, comment, and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. There are Patreon and PayPal links below. And the next episode is on Promethean Man and the heretical imperative. Have a good day.